If you like history that actually surprises you, this is your channel. Subscribe before the next reveal drops. A skull sits under fluorescent light in a drawer that hasn't been opened in decades. Beside it, stone tools, a hearth, the ash of a fire built by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. None of it came from a museum dig in the Rift Valley. It came out of a barite mine. A mine, not a savanna, not a valley cradled in every documentary you've ever watched. Thousands of kilometers from the spot every textbook map draws a starting pin into. And when the dating equipment finally caught up to the bones, the number that came back was older than the beginning itself was supposed to allow. Not close, not a rounding error, older than the starting point on the map that this fossil was, technically, standing outside of. Here's the part that should bother you. For decades, this find sat there half-explained, treated as a strange outlier, a maybe, a footnote. It wasn't a footnote. It was a correction nobody had agreed to publish yet, so before we get to what it actually rewrites, ask yourself this. If the birthplace marked on the map is in the wrong place, what does that do to everyone's family tree, including yours? The story you already know goes like this. In 1987, Rebecca Cann, Mark Stoneking, and Alan Wilson published a study in Nature built on mitochondrial DNA, the small ring of genetic material passed almost untouched from mother to child, like a family recipe copied by hand for 200,000 years, occasionally smudged, but never rewritten from scratch. Their data pointed to one common maternal ancestor, roughly 200,000 years old. The interpretation that stuck, the one that made it onto classroom posters, placed her in East Africa. One dot, one moment, one arrow, drawn outward from the Rift Valley toward every continent on Earth. Except the number 200,000 was always a little softer than the textbooks made it sound. It was a statistical estimate with a wide margin, dressed up, over the years, as a fixed date on a timeline. That didn't stop the story from becoming the story. It's in museum dioramas. It's in the opening 30 seconds of half the documentaries made about human origins. It's the single, clean arrow radiating out of East Africa that you've seen so many times you'd draw it from memory without thinking. You'd expect a story repeated that often, that consistently, to be settled. You'd be wrong, because one fossil, sitting in a drawer in Morocco for the better part of 100 years, never fit the arrow. And when scientists finally dated it properly, the arrow didn't bend. It broke. Here is where it gets complicated. The fossils are from Jebel Irhoud, Morocco. In 2017, a team led by Jean-Jacques Hublin of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published new dating results in Nature, placing them at roughly 315,000 years old. Not the East African timeline plus a little wiggle room. 100,000 years older than the comfortable version of the story could easily absorb. Sit with the geography for a second, because the geography is the twist, not just the age. This isn't East Africa. It's the opposite corner of the continent, northwest, on the edge of the Sahara, thousands of kilometers from the Rift Valley cradle. If our species is already over 300,000 years old, and already present that early in a location that far from the supposed single point of origin, then the one cradle story, the one you were just told, the one on the poster, cannot be literally true as drawn. Not a minor asterisk. A structural problem with the map itself. So where does that leave the single dot everyone keeps pointing to? Ethiopia? Kenya? Somewhere else entirely? Or, and this is the question the field still hasn't agreed how to answer, was there ever really just one dot to begin with? Hublin's team noticed something else at the site, something that gets picked up again later and matters more than it looks like right now. The tools and the physical traits at Jebel Irhoud don't read like an isolated population that stumbled into existence alone in a corner of the continent. They read like something connected, techniques and features that echo populations found elsewhere across Africa. Not a one-off, an outlier that behaves like it has relatives. Clean, expected. That's what the old map promised you. This isn't that. Researchers are careful to frame what comes next as probability, not certainty. Nobody is holding up Jebel Irhoud and declaring the old model dead on the spot. But probability is exactly where the disagreement lives now, and it splits into at least two very different directions. One of those directions belongs, in part, to Hublin's own team, and to researchers working from a similar, more conservative instinct. Keep the single lineage model, but stretch it. On this read, Jebel Irhoud doesn't mean there were multiple separate origins. It means early populations moved within Africa faster and farther than anyone had assumed, dispersing from a broader ancestral source at rates some estimates place in the hundreds of kilometers per generation, sustained across many thousands of years. Fast enough, over enough millennia, to plant a population in Morocco while the trunk of the lineage stayed rooted in the East. one tree. Just a branch that grew unexpectedly quickly, unexpectedly far. It's a theory that saves the shape of the old map while redrawing its edges. And it has a real limitation, one its own defenders don't hide. It requires assuming a rapid, early, continent-spanning movement, for which there is no continuous fossil trail. No clean line of sites connecting east to northwest, step by step, generation by generation. The gap is real. Nobody has filled it. Every version of this theory currently on the table is, in effect, betting that the missing evidence will eventually turn up in exactly the shape the model needs. That gap, empty, unresolved, sitting right in the middle of the map, is exactly what a second, messier explanation was built to fill. Because not everyone studying this data agrees that a fast migration is what's actually being seen at Jebel Irhoud. Some researchers think the entire premise, a single point of origin, one dot, one arrow, is the thing that needs to be abandoned. Not adjusted, not stretched, abandoned, not adjusted, not stretched, abandoned, and the researcher whose name sits behind that argument has spent years building the case for exactly that. Eleanor Seri, of the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, published the clearest version of it in 2018 in the journal Trends in Ecology and Evolution. Her model doesn't have a name that fits neatly on a poster. Researchers call it the Pan-African model, sometimes African multi-regionalism, and the core claim is this: humans didn't emerge from one population in one place. They emerged from several, semi-isolated, scattered across the continent, each shaped by a different climate, a different landscape, sometimes cut off from the others for tens of thousands of years at a stretch, then reconnected, trading genes and traits back and forth like separate rivers occasionally overflowing into each other's banks before pulling apart again. Sit with what that does to Theory 1. Theory 1 needed a single lineage that simply moved fast. One trunk, one branch that raced ahead of the rest. Seri's model removes the trunk. There's no one lineage that moved quickly, because on this read there was never one lineage to begin with. The map isn't wrong because a migration happened faster than expected. It's wrong at a more basic level than that. It's wrong because it was never built around a single point in the first place. You'd think evidence for something that sweeping would be circumstantial. It isn't. Seri's model draws on the archaeological record showing distinct regional toolkit traditions, different styles of stone tools, developed independently in different regions of Africa, persisting in parallel for over 100,000 years. Not converging, not one influencing the other into uniformity. Separate traditions running side by side, for a span of time longer than the entire Out of Africa narrative was ever supposed to take. Picture it directly. Two tool-making traditions, 1,000 miles of desert and grassland between them, each one refined generation after generation by people who never met, who never knew the other existed, and this arrangement outlasting recorded history several times over before either group had any idea they were part of the same species story. That's not a footnote to the timeline. That's most of the timeline. Here is where the field stops agreeing on anything close to a consensus, and where one number gets mentioned reluctantly, usually with a qualifier attached first. Sarah Tishkoff, at the University of Pennsylvania, led a 2009 study in Science that sampled DNA from 121 African populations, one of the largest genetic surveys of the continent ever assembled, and sorted them into 14 distinct ancestral clusters. Buried inside that data was a result that made even cautious researchers choose their words carefully. The San peoples of southern Africa, sometimes called the Khoisan, carry the most deeply diverged human lineage documented anywhere on Earth. Diverged from what, and by how much, is the number nobody quite wants to say out loud without a hedge attached, because the number is large enough to unsettle the whole timeline a second time. Some estimates place the split between San ancestors and the rest of humanity at 200,000 years or more. 200,000. The same figure once used to mark the birth of the species. Except here, it's marking a branch splitting off inside it. The tree didn't just branch on the way out of the continent, it had already branched. Wildly, repeatedly, before anyone left at all. Say that number out loud and it stops being abstract fast. So put yourself inside it instead of just hearing it. Imagine standing at the edge of the Kalahari, 10,000 years before the first stone of the first pyramid was ever quarried. Heat shimmer over red sand. A horizon with no permanent water source in any direction you can walk in a day. Small, mobile groups moving with the seasons, following game and rain, isolated by distance so vast that contact with anyone outside the region might happen once in a generation, if at all. This isn't a scene from the deep past in the way deep past usually gets used in documentaries. A soft, sepia-toned once upon a time. This is a specific population, in a specific place, whose lineage was already ancient by the time other populations, in Scary's model, were still forming. The people standing at that edge of the Kalahari were carrying genetic history that predates the beginning most of the world was taught. Not metaphorically, measurably, tied directly to Tishkov's divergence figure, not a poetic flourish laid over empty geography. And if that number is unsettling on its own, what came out of a genetics lab in California in 2020 unsettles it further, because it doesn't just push the timeline back. It adds something to the tree that was never supposed to be there at all. Arun Durvasula and Sriram Sankararaman at UCLA published findings in Science Advances identifying what they termed ghost archaic DNA, genetic material inherited from an ancient hominin population that has never been found as a fossil, never been named, never been directly observed in any form except as a signature left behind in the genomes of people alive today. They found it in living West African populations, specifically among the Yoruba and Mende. This lineage, this ghost, to use the researchers' own word for it, is estimated to have split off from the rest of the human family somewhere between roughly 360,000 and over 1 million years ago, and its trace isn't a rounding error in the genome. Current estimates put it at somewhere between 2 and 19% of the ancestry carried by some living West Africans today. Not myth, not fossil, present, walking around, right now, in the DNA of people you could meet, encoded in a population that science has never located, dug up, or put a name to. There's a researcher in this field, unnamed in most of the published literature, out of caution more than uncertainty, who has described conversations with descendants of the populations carrying this signature. People encountering, for the first time, the idea that part of their ancestry comes from something science can detect but cannot show them. No skull. No skeleton in a drawer in Morocco, no site to visit, just a signal, sitting quietly in their own cells, older than most of human history combined. If an entire branch of the human family, never found, never fossilized, never given a name beyond ghost, is still detectable in people alive right now, the next question isn't really about West Africa at all. It's about how many other branches like it are sitting undetected in genomes everywhere else on Earth, simply because nobody has gone looking yet. Because here's what widens, once you step back far enough. This isn't only an African story, even though Africa is where the evidence happens to be oldest and best preserved. Every population on this planet almost certainly carries its own version of this. Splits, mergers, ghost lineages nobody has identified, ancestors who left no bones behind, only a signature in living descendants. Africa isn't the exception to a clean, simple human story. Africa is simply the place where the record is deep enough that the cracks in that simple story show first. Think of the old model the way you'd think of a single photograph passed down for generations. One image, one moment, framed and hung on a wall, labeled the beginning. What the last few decades of genetics have actually handed us isn't a replacement photograph. It's the archive the photograph was quietly pulled from. Dozens of exposures, taken at different times, in different places, overlapping and contradicting each other, none of them alone telling the whole story, all of them true at once. The map didn't just get one line redrawn. African DNA just broke the world map, and nobody currently working in this field has agreed on how, or even whether, a new one can be drawn to replace it.